Yeah.
Welcome to the Voice of Many podcast show with Yolanda and Vanessa.
Good evening, good morning. Just good to see you. Just want to let you know we have a fantastic guest with us. Her name is Jenna Ashlyn, and she is a survivor of abuse, but she's also a counselor. She has written numerous books. She has appeared in so many different magazines, including Night Rose and the Atwood Review and Poet Choice. She's won awards that she's going to talk to us about, but also she has two new books. She wrote a book in 2020 called Within the Gray, and her second book was just released as well. The name of that one was Sheila Man. So, welcome, Jenna. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I do want to make one small correction, though. I'm not a counselor, I'm an advocate. It's a
Advocate.
little bit different, and the training and the background is a little bit different. I just don't want anybody to think that, like, I'm a professional psychologist or anything like that. Any advice that I give is stuff that I've ran through professionals and stuff from my personal experience.
Okay. All right. Well, if you will, just let our guests know a little bit more about you. You gave a brief introduction as well. Anything else you would like to share before we jump into this great topic today?
Well, I am a survivor and an advocate just as much as I am a published author. And it's so important to me to bring positivity and light to survivors. That way they can go from being a victim and living in that victim mentality to becoming a survivor and being able to thrive and live a better life than they could have imagined. And that's what I hope for everyone. And I hope that all of the negativity that I experience can be turned
Mhm.
into something good for someone else.
So true. So true.
And I also want to say, since a lot of women have been through different types of abuse, and we all have different reasons for leaving, some later or sooner than others. But what was your reason for leaving as you were going through your abuse?
It was very difficult for me because I had actually entered the relationship from a very vulnerable state. I had lost my husband whenever I was 30 years old, and I went looking for a friend and kept telling him, "Hey, I'm not ready for a relationship." And the reason that I went looking for a friend is because some men are awful, and I guess I was just surrounded by the bad ones at that time, because
Mhm.
even at my husband's funeral, I had guys coming up and hitting on me and trying to get with me, and then they would show up at my apartment. So I was feeling very uncomfortable. And so I kind of made a guy friend to deflect. But that was just kind of the beginning. But my reason for leaving was kind of waking up and realizing how bad it really was. And then one day, my daughter, she was only 8 or 9 years old at the time, and I was tucking her into bed, and she looked up at me and she said, "Mommy, I want a new daddy." And I was heartbroken because not only did she say that, and I mean, this is my baby girl,
Mhm.
but the realization that it was affecting them as well, and it wasn't all in my head. It just kind of made it very real. But it was several years after that before I managed to find a way out.
And one of the reasons why we were glad that we matched with you so well is that we both have been there in the abuse. And my first marriage, the abuse was so bad that where my daughter came to me and said, if you don't leave him, I'm leaving you. You know, she was ready to say, I'm done with both of you because the abuse was so bad. And the it was physical, but it was more so the mental part. And the mental part of the abuse stays with you, and it never leaves. It's just like a scar that never heals. And being able to, I feel, talk about it but also get the proper counseling. And like yourself being an advocate, hearing about it, talking about it, it really does help. It really helps.
It
So,
does. I'm so sorry you went through that.
but
It's
it made
very
us stronger.
difficult.
You know, it's and that's the whole thing too, is that um the abuse, it's almost you have to fight it. You know, you're going through the process, but you're learning to fight it. And some of us, we have to have that extra help. And I thank you so much for what you're doing. I really do. Really do.
Thank you.
So
Every person that we can reach is one more that doesn't have to fight alone.
true. That's so true. And so how do you learn to move on to a new relationship and to be a better you?
It takes a lot of work, so much work. For me, I did a lot of journaling very early on whenever I was still in the process of trying to leave. I wanted to heal. I wanted to find myself again. And that was my main focus in life. I mean, I wasn't a very good employee at the time. I was a store manager and I was gone a lot. And there was just so much going on that it weighed on me very heavily. So there was a program through the company that I worked for where I could text counselors, and I did that every day. I was always talking to someone. I wasn't really afraid of sharing my story with people that didn't know me, but anything that I said like to people around me, if someone were to overhear it, it would get back to my abuser, and he would give me lots of problems. And he would say he told me if I said anything to anyone that he would make my life a living hell and that I would regret it, and that he would say everything that I did. So part of moving on was learning to speak again. And there was a lot of communication. Whenever I entered into a relationship, it was someone that I had known for quite a while, that had just been a customer in my store. And it's actually a really beautiful story because here I am, I'm going through all of these horrible things. And every once in a while, this guy would come in and we'd have these really deep relationship discussions like, what is love? Is it really real? And he was very much against women because he is a survivor as well. And I was very much against men and being in a relationship. So it's just like, nah, I'm on my own, no drama here, you know?
Mhm.
So we were acquaintances and having like really deep discussions for a year. And then there came a point where we started to get a lot closer, and we started having really long phone calls to each other. Those conversations got very, very deep, and we actually helped each other heal and helped each other see our own patterns. And he bought me a journal, and I used that journal. And every time that I would get triggered or I would get upset, I would write about that. And it was just kind of a process, but we'd known each other for a year and a half by the time when we started dating.
Wow. Something.
So, with everything that you did go through, what choices would you make differently than you did before?
I was really concerned about making him leave and getting him to leave voluntarily so it would be less violent, simply because I owned my home and he didn't have a way to pay the bills because he didn't work at the time. And I have 3 kids and he had one, so it was much easier for him to leave. And I was worried about keeping my kids physically safe and in our home. If I were to go back and do it again, I wouldn't care so much. Even if I was just living with the 3 kids in the vehicle, they would have ended up having a lot less psychological damage had I done that. I thought I was doing the right thing, but leaving earlier, no matter what the cost, would have been better for them.
Wow. So what would you say um, the effects of the abuse? How did it affect your mental health?
I thought I was crazy for a long time, but that was kind of part of his mental abuse. That was part of his manipulative tactics.
Mm,
And I thought I was going through a midlife crisis. I thought I was bipolar. I thought I was, had borderline personality disorder. I thought everything in the world was wrong with me that could be wrong with me. And as I learned and grew, I realized that those were all trauma responses.
mm,
And there was a time when I was severely suicidal, and I tried to tell him about it, and he said, "Well, you won't do it." I mean, he was right, but that's not why I didn't do it. It was my kids. It was, you know, I seen like a little vision of a good life that was possible. And, I made some phone calls, and I remember I was on my way to work, which was an hour and a half drive at the time. And I just cried on the crisis line for a long time, and just I really had a difficult time for a long time until I found that little ray of hope within myself, and I started building my way out. And that's when I started to recover and start to understand myself better.
wow. So, how do you think? I know you said your daughter wanted a new dad.
Yeah.
So, how is she now experiencing, what she saw you go through? And as a child, do you see her as being better now?
No. She's still going through it. Um, there's been My kids have suffered tremendously. Like I mentioned before, the biggest thing that I really wish I would have done was leave earlier, no matter what. I have 3 kids, and my son was suicidal and hospitalized twice. And my youngest, the one that I was referring to, she's been hospitalized once. They both have severe anxiety issues, PTSD and social anxiety. And it is a work in progress, so we're not done. So,
Mm.
but at least they are able to have their feelings now, and they're able to express those where they would not have been before.
We wish them the very best with the healing and recovery. We really do. All of you, all of you.
And it takes time.
Mm,
Me as a child that went through it, it takes time even as an adult. I'm 30. It still affects me day to day. But luckily, I have support from my mom. Me and my mom are best friends.
yeah,
I do have, luckily, a husband who understands the things that I've went through and doesn't take it personal, but will at the same time to let me know, like, hey, it's not as bad as it seems, but it does take time, but they will get through it. As long as they have a loving mom like you, they will definitely get through it.
yeah, yeah.
Like I said, I know that it's a process, and sometimes it gets discouraging, but we still are much better than what we were before, because we're free
Mhm.
to be ourselves. And a lot of the times I always like to point out how much more beautiful on the other side of this, when you start to heal and you really start to recover and dig deep, that life is so much more beautiful on the other side. And
Mhm.
once you've had a relationship with an abuser, once you actually find a good guy and you have that healing and stuff in your life, and you have
Mm,
all of these things, life is so much more beautiful. You love
it is.
deeper than what you could ever imagine. I'm so thankful every day.
Right, right. Well, Vanessa, I'll let you talk about the books with her.
Why did you choose to write a book about your abuse?
At first, I'm just looking over at the book because I smile every time I look at it. And at first, it was, kind of part of my healing process, just to kind of get it all out there. And it's very detailed. But then as I was about halfway through, I realized that it was a lot more than that, that
Mm,
it could help people, that people needed to hear my story, because there were a few people that I sent it out to just to kind of let them read it and see, what their thoughts were on it. And I had like some screening questions, and it was amazing to me the things that they said and how they related to it. And it meant so much because I felt like I was reaching them, and they thanked me and told me I was brave and that they needed to hear that, because we all know that abuse is out there and that there's so much of it that it's ridiculous, but we just put labels on it and we just call it that, and nobody talks about it. Not really, not what it's really like, especially not the things that I went through, which was mostly mental abuse, narcissistic abuse, sexual coercion, and sexual assault. There's so many subtleties in there that people often overlook, and that's why people feel so alone and they feel so helpless, because they don't see a way out. They don't see a chance for healing, and I wanted to be an example of that.
That's great. That is great. So what is there any other advice that you would like to give to those that are watching and listening?
Absolutely. Don't be afraid of being triggered. I've actually talked to several professionals about this, and they really surprised me because I felt like I was being really controversial. Don't be afraid of being triggered. Don't run from that. Allow yourself to feel those emotions, because they're your emotions. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to be afraid. Whenever you're triggered in those moments, that's your body and your mind telling you that, hey, you need to heal. There's something here. We need to talk about this. It is your body and your mind telling you, hey, we need to do something. Whenever you get triggered, which if you've been through any of these types of scenarios, reading my book will most likely trigger you, and that's okay. Use it as a tool. Get out your journal every time you start to feel those feelings and you start to panic and you start to get scared, or you get sad remembering something that happened to you that may be similar in some ways. Write it down. Take that energy and those emotions and write it down and use it as a tool. Whenever you are done and you're starting to feel a little bit better and you're not in that triggering moment anymore, go back and read through it. See how you feel. You'll start to see patterns of thinking, and you can start to ask yourself, well, I wasn't in any danger. Why did I feel that way? And you can bring up those things that happened to you, and that gives you an opportunity to really look at it and dissect it and heal. If you're seeing a therapist, this is a great tool if you feel open to it, to take to them, because you're only seeing them once or twice a month. If you're really lucky, you're seeing them more often than that, but they're not with you. They're not in your head. This gives them a way to help you a little better. And don't be afraid to have those deep, meaningful conversations with people. It helps.
It's really good.
Thank you so much for being with us, Jenna.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, if you have any questions or suggestions, please contact us on our social media web pages. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And on behalf of our podcast, our sponsors, and our partners, we want to thank you for being with us today.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.